The air that afternoon felt still, the kind of stillness people used to talk about back in quieter years, when towns were smaller and strangers still nodded to each other on the street. At the edge of an old gas station just outside a fading highway town stood a little girl named Lila. She couldn't have been more than 7. Her dress was worn thin at the sleeves, and her shoes didn't quite fit anymore. In her small hand, she clutched a stuffed bear that had clearly seen better days, one ear loose, its fur faded from years of being held close. Her hair was messy, her face streaked with tears, but she stood there anyway. Waiting. Not for anything in particular, just waiting, the way children do when they've learned life doesn't always explain itself. Across the gravel lot, the low rumble of motorcycles began to grow. One, then a few, then many. A group of bikers rolled in slowly, their engines echoing like distant thunder. Leather jackets, worn boots, quiet eyes. They moved together with a kind of understanding that didn't need words. Among them was a man named Grant. He was older, maybe in his early 60s. His beard was white, long, and carefully kept. His arms, covered in faded tattoos, told stories from a lifetime most people wouldn't fully understand. Grant wasn't loud. He wasn't the kind of man who needed to be. He simply carried himself with a calm that came from having seen enough of life to know what mattered, and what didn't. As the bike settled into silence, his eyes moved across the lot, and stopped. On Lila. There was something about the way she stood there. Not begging. Not asking. Just existing. Grant took a slow breath, then stepped forward, his boots crunching softly on the gravel. The other bikers watched quietly, giving him space. Lila didn't move at first. She looked up at him with wide, uncertain eyes. Grant knelt down slowly, careful not to startle her. "Hey there," he said gently, his voice low and steady. "That your bear?" Lila nodded, gripping it a little tighter. "His name's Rusty," she whispered. Grant gave a small smile. "Good name," he said. "He looks like he's been through a lot." She nodded again, and for a moment, her lip trembled. Before she could say anything else, the quiet shifted. From behind the station, 2 men appeared. Rough-looking. Unsteady. The kind of presence that makes people uneasy before a word is even spoken. They moved toward Grant, toward the bikes. "Nice setup you got here," one of them said, his tone carrying something sharp underneath. Grant didn't stand. He stayed where he was, beside Lila. "Afternoon," he replied calmly. The men glanced at the motorcycles, then at the jackets, then back at Grant. "You mind if we take a closer look?" the other one said, stepping forward without waiting for an answer. The tension wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It hung there, quiet and heavy. Lila felt it. Children always do. And before anyone could react, before Grant could rise, one of the men shoved him. Not hard enough to knock him down completely, but enough. Enough to cross a line. Grant steadied himself, his knee still close to the ground. The bikers behind him shifted, just slightly. And that's when it happened. Lila stepped forward. Small. Fragile. But without hesitation. "Stop," she cried, her voice breaking through the stillness. The men paused, surprised. She moved between them and Grant, holding her bear tightly against her chest. "You leave him alone," she said, tears streaming down her face now. "He didn't do anything to you." There was something about the way she said it. Not angry. Not loud. Just honest. One of the men scoffed. "Kid, move." But she didn't. And in that moment, one of them lashed out. It wasn't something anyone expected. Not even Grant. The shove knocked Lila sideways. She stumbled, falling to the gravel, her bear slipping from her hands. For a second, everything stopped. Grant's expression changed. Not into anger. But into something deeper. A kind of quiet, steady resolve. He stood up slowly. Not rushed. Not loud. Just certain. The other bikers stepped forward now. No shouting. No chaos. Just presence. The two men looked around, suddenly aware of the situation they had walked into. And just as quickly as they had appeared, they backed away. Muttering. Leaving. The sound of their footsteps faded into the distance. Silence returned. Grant turned immediately to Lila, kneeling beside her again. Hey, he said softly, brushing gravel from her sleeve. You all right? She nodded, though tears still fell freely. He picked up her bear, gently dusting it off, and handed it back to her. You're a brave one, he said quietly. She shook her head. I was scared, she admitted. Grant smiled, just a little. Yeah, he said. That's usually when it counts the most. One of the other bikers stepped forward with a small first aid kit. Another brought a bottle of water. They didn't crowd her. They didn't overwhelm her. They simply helped. The way people used to. After a while, Lila sat on an old wooden bench near the station, sipping water while Grant sat beside her. You got someone looking after you? He asked gently. She hesitated, then shook her head. Not really. Grant nodded slowly. He didn't ask too many questions. Sometimes, people don't need questions. They just need someone to stay. The sun began to dip lower in the sky, casting long, golden shadows across the lot. And then, in the distance, a sound. Familiar. Deep. Growing. Another motorcycle. Then another. Then many more. Lila looked up, confused. Grant didn't seem surprised. One by one, bikes rolled in, lining the edge of the road, filling the space with a quiet, powerful presence. Dozens. Then more. Men and women, all wearing the same patch, the same quiet understanding. They didn't come rushing. They didn't make noise. They simply arrived. Because word travels, in certain circles, in ways most people never notice. One of the riders stepped up to Grant, nodding once. We heard, he said simply. Grant nodded back. That was enough. Lila looked around, eyes wide. Are they all your friends? She asked. Grant smiled softly. Something like that. She thought about that for a moment, then hugged her bear a little tighter. My mom used to say, she said quietly, you can tell who someone is by who shows up for them. Grant looked at her, really looked at her. And for a moment, something in his expression softened even more. She sounds like a wise woman, he said. Lila nodded. She was. The sky turned a deeper shade of orange. And in that quiet, ordinary place, something simple and rare settled in. Not excitement. Not drama. Just connection. The kind people remember later in life. The kind that stays. Grant stood slowly, then held out his hand. Come on, he said gently. Let's get you something warm to eat. Lila hesitated, then placed her small hand in his. Trust doesn't always come easy. But sometimes, it arrives quietly, in moments like this. As they walked toward the diner across the road, the line of bikes stood still behind them, like a quiet promise. Not of power. Not of fear. But of something older. Something steady. That even in a world that changes too fast, kindness still shows up. And sometimes, it arrives on two wheels, with weathered hands, and a heart that remembers what it means to stand beside someone who needs it. And years from now, when Lila would think back on that day, she wouldn't remember the fear as much. She would remember the way someone stayed. The way strangers became something more. And the quiet truth that life teaches, if we're willing to listen. That even the smallest act of courage can bring more kindness into the world than we ever expect.